The history books sell a very specific story about Solon of Athens. They paint him as the flawless father of democracy, the wise lawgiver who built a fair system and then walked away, choosing voluntary exile over absolute power. But that noble sacrifice was a catastrophic strategic error. By choosing his own conscience over control, Solon condemned Western civilization to thousands of years of political instability. To understand why, look at the reality of the early 6th century BC. Athens was teetering on the edge of total collapse. A handful of aristocrats owned nearly everything, while debt slavery had turned the vast majority of the population into living property. Famine was widespread, and a brutal civil war was all but guaranteed. Right at that boiling point, Solon was handed the rarest political currency in human history: absolute, unanimous consensus. The rich trusted him to maintain order, and the poor trusted him to deliver justice. He had the exact leverage needed to become a dictator and enforce lasting peace, and he simply refused to wield it. He started with a highly effective economic intervention. He enacted the Saisakthea, or the shaking off of burdens, completely wiping out the debts of the lower class. Then he restructured the rigid social hierarchy, dividing society into classes based on wealth, rather than the bloodline you were born into. He had an army of grateful, newly freed citizens at his back. He could have used them to crush any remaining aristocratic opposition. Instead, he made a fatal error. He forced the citizens to swear they wouldn't change his laws, and left Athens on a 10-year self-imposed exile. You cannot hand a desperate populace a political voice without the enforced stability required to teach them how to use it. Without Solon there to enforce the new rules, the system immediately fractured, plunging Athens into decades of bitter infighting and chaos. He built a delicate engine of governance that required his specific authority to keep running, and then abandoned it to the wolves. Which poses a serious structural question. What if Solon hadn't walked away? Let's reset the timeline precisely to 594 BC. The aristocrats start protesting the loss of their wealth, but this time, Solon recognizes that true stability demands an iron grip. He stays, and he crowns himself perpetual strategos, dictator for life. By eliminating the assembly's bickering, Athens transforms into a centralized meritocracy. With a permanent leader, the city-state uses its newfound wealth to absorb its neighbors through aggressive defense pacts and trade dominance. This Pax Atheneus creates a unified Greek front centuries before history intended. When the Persian Empire eventually attempts its westward expansion, they don't find a collection of squabbling cities. They meet a professional, standing army equipped by an industrial-scale economy. In this timeline, the Greco-Persian Wars become a systematic conquest, with Greek forces dismantling the Achaemenid dynasty in a matter of years. With the Persian coffers flowing inward and no political shifts to disrupt funding, state-run academies thrive. Without the Dark Ages or the fragmentation of the Roman collapse to slow things down, the mastery of metallurgy and physics accelerates. The scientific process hits high gear 2 millennia early. By 200 BC, these academies are no longer debating theory. They use centralized state resources to manufacture high-pressure steam engines, turning the legendary inventions of Heron and Archimedes into the primary propulsion for an unstoppable imperial fleet. Fast forward to the present day in this alternate reality, the Roman Empire never had the oxygen to grow, leaving Rome as nothing more than a minor provincial backwater under Athenian control. The entire globe operates as a cultural monolith. Greek is the universal language of software, trade, and diplomacy, and instead of the major modern religions, the state mandates a hyper-rational Neoplatonism, a belief system built entirely on strict logic, mathematics, and hierarchy. Imagine a city like Tokyo or San Francisco, but with a development curve that never hit a plateau. These cities run on fusion energy, yet they strictly maintain the austere marble aesthetics of the classical era. This is a world where technological progress was never interrupted by the rise and fall of warring kingdoms. Because this timeline hit the Industrial Revolution 2,000 years ago, its technological trajectory is vastly different. By the time our history reached the Renaissance, this empire was likely already interplanetary. In this world, Athenian flags were planted on Mars before we even mastered the printing press. This global empire eradicated poverty through total resource management, but it achieved that perfection by stripping away individual political agency. It is a world of total efficiency and zero dissent. But that is not the world we live in. We live in the slow, messy reality, where progress is constantly interrupted by the very system Solon left behind. Solon's failure reveals a deep psychological blind spot in political idealism. He truly believed that well-written laws could entirely replace the physical will and enforcement of a strong leader. The harsh reality of statecraft is that populations do not inherently desire freedom. When the chips are down, they crave security, strict order, and clear direction, far more than they care about abstract political rights. Solon possessed immense moral discipline, but he was strategically blind. By trying to teach his citizens how to govern themselves in a world still dominated by ruthless predators, he handed them a fragile system that consistently cannibalized itself through panic and populism. Modern leaders often forget the very rule that Solon ignored. Reason and logic are powerless if there is no sword there to enforce them. Institutions are inherently weaker than raw ambition. Solon gave us the right to choose our own path, but in doing so, he guaranteed that our path would be defined by the same repetitive cycles of waste and internal conflict that a single iron will could have bypassed.